Did you get a copy of this?
Yeah,
Was just an hour.
they just crossed out the end of it. Okay, 1, 2, yeah.
You got all girls, so you probably are.
Well, I do mean it in this instance.
All right, good evening. Welcome to the October 28th Committee of the Whole. We have one item on the agenda. It's the 25-26 biennial budget. Carrie?
Thank you so much. Good evening. This is our last council deliberation for going over the budget. So here's the calendar. We're going to be going over some of the summary of the changes that we've talked about a little bit the last couple of weeks, but I'll summarize those. And then we've given you a draft of all the legislation. And then if there's, we'll have the opportunity to have you ask any other questions this evening, and then we can talk about next steps after that. Some of the summary of changes that I'll be discussing this evening is to go over the final property tax levy rate. I'll go over that in the next slide. We also have some changes to the salary schedules from that was in your preliminary budget. The first one was that in your preliminary budget, we were in the middle of still contract negotiations with the non-commissioned police officers. That contract was approved by council in September, but based on when the preliminary budget was printed, it still showed under negotiation. So in your legislation, it does have the current 2025 rates for the non-commissioned police officers based on the contract that was approved by council. The other change for the salary schedule is in the non-represented salary schedule, there's a correction to footnote 4. Footnote 4 refers to pay for a deputy police chiefs. In the footnote 4, it had exclusion for education premium, and it should have included that they would be receiving an education premium. The other commissioned officers also have an education premium, and so the intent of some of the changes for the salary for the deputy chiefs was to not only change their pay grade, but to also include education premium. And then for the fee schedule, there's just a couple housekeeping items there. We had removed some reference to ADUs where we had no charge for ADUs, and instead of redlining that out, the footnote had just been removed. So we've now included the footnote with a red line through. The fees there's no fee for the PR ADU because it's a permit ready ADU. And so instead of having a footnote in all the different sections, we just have it in the ADU section. And then secondly, some of the parks fees were referenced at the incorrect rate. They showed that rates were increased in 2024 for just a handful, but in the document that you received in the preliminary budget, there was a few rates that had the 2023 rates in 2025. So your updated legislation has all of that in there. An example of that would be lap swim. In your preliminary budget said $5 and it should have been $7. That's an example of some of the changes. For the property tax, we did receive the most recently updated rate from King County. The estimated levy rate is $26.3 million. This would be an estimated levy rate of 92 cents per assessed value. The reason that the estimated levy rate goes down is for two reasons. The levy amount increases, but the assessed value has also increased. So anytime the assessed value goes up, the levy rate goes down just as a matter of math because the assessed value is part of the denominator of the whole overall rate calculation. If we were not making any changes to the levy amount, our rate still would have gone down because our assessed value went up. So this is a little less than 2% increase, or for our average household, $13.73 per average household. We're not going to change the amount in the budget, just the levy rate ordinance will reflect this amount. because typically there are some small amounts that we don't receive year over year. So since it was such a small change, the overall budget figures is still the same, but the ordinance will read this exact amount. So there's quite a bit of legislation that needs to be passed in order to pass the budget. We have two property tax ordinances. We have the piped utility rate adjustments ordinance. Council has already done the solid waste rate adjustments. There's the fee schedule resolution, and then the budget ordinance, which would include the salary schedules. And then we also, because of some of the changes with Parks and Recreation, we're removing from 5 divisions down to 2. Title 3 of our code needs to read that we only have 2 divisions now. So there are 6 legislation items listed. And so the next steps would be opening it up to council if they have any other questions about some of the changes that I went over, or any other questions that we've discussed over the last several weeks. And then there's also a draft committee report. If there are no changes, we can certainly discuss having that read this evening to put the first reading of the budget on the November 4th meeting. But if there's still some further discussion that we need to have, we can certainly do that and change the committee report if we need to.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions from council?
Mr. President?
Yes, Councilmember Perez.
Thank you, Carrie. And I want to thank you also for the emails that you send us, replying some of the questions that we asked that were not fully answered. The only question that I feel that that doesn't have to be answered today, of course, but that I feel that my question was not fully responded was when I asked Parks and Recreation Department that how did they have a plan for the revenue that we're receiving from the golf course. I understand that today the money that is coming, we are using for the golf course. We had it to be able to fulfill that, but with the way and the rate that is going, with the revenue that is coming, I don't know if in the future will be a self, how do you call it?
Self-sustaining.
Self-sustain. And my question was more towards what is the plan of the department? What is the goal? I understand that raising the rates is not ideally because that's part of the attraction. But what is the plan? I don't know, to promote it better, to bring more customers. So that way we will increase the revenue. If there is a plan in place for fixing the situation, because the way it's going is not really looking good. So when I ask the question, I do understand that you explain the numbers and what money we're going to use to pay it, but that was not my question really. My question is the way it's looking is like we have to think on a plan or how we can make the golf course worse for us and for the city in a better way. So eventually, if we can get to that answer, I will appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank
I
you.
understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Perez.
Sorry. So I'm gonna keep going until I just was gonna do one at a time. But the other one is when the city attorney presented, I thought it was great. The presentation, it was very comprehensive. What he's asking and what he's asking. But my only concern at the end that I reviewed the budget again was that I didn't just want attorney for the way the city has grown. I don't know if that is enough because while he really restructured the department, and I appreciate the logic behind all of this, when I compare it with past budgets and I have seen how the department has grown compared of other departments as well as the growth of the city, it doesn't reflect that in the amount of work that today that department must be having. So my only curiosity was that if he just requested one or only one was authorized or he has the need for more support and because budget constraints, we could not accommodate to the needs of that department.
The city attorney's office, all the position changes were reflected in this budget, what they were asking. I think that inherently Shane is being careful about not adding too much and wanting to see what are the current changes that he is making, how will that impact the department. He certainly can come back and revisit it, but there were no further requests that he had when we all sat down as administrators to really look at what do we need to be moving forward. I think that there could be some changes in the future just because inherently some things, as you know, legislation changes, there might be added workload. But I think the changes that he made, I don't know if he's here this evening, but I think it was based
Alex.
on hoping that
Everybody's looking at you, Alex.
hoping that the
Sure.
changes that he made would be able to handle with the workload they had. A lot of the workload they had was around contracts. And so I think adding that city attorney helping to absorb some of the contract work was really his first hope. Making some of the promotional changes and movements, I think he was thinking that that would suffice. But definitely noted that, you know, all of us need to probably continue to look at how things change within our department. And I think that he felt like that would work okay for right now.
Very much. Okay. I highly appreciate it.
Any other questions from council? Go ahead, Councilmember Perez.
And in the last review to the budget, I also forgot to ask, and that's the part of when we have the other services and others, and the adding of in Parks and Recreation is substantial, the percentage, but because the reorganization is hard to put compared to the past budgets where the allocation is exactly. And I didn't ask with details if we have in plan some of these funds to be used for the senior center or for the museum and the museum and the museum. Because the senior center, we have not funded, more than the basics since the, I would not say the pandemic, since the recession. We've barely had, other than grants that we have received, we really have not have a long-range plan of how we are going to improve the facility and do our largest constituents fail in that group now as seniors. I will like to see where are the future plans and the funding is behind what we can accommodate, because right now we have been using the CDBG funds and the ARPA funds to fund some of the most important needs, which was basically replacing the roof and the HVAC, which were completely falling apart. But we have not had that long-range plan of how we are going to improve our that facility. And just having a conversation today, I didn't even think about asking about the museum. For the longest time after we rebuilt the lobby, the plan was in theory to do more for the museum, but I have not seen them in the last 9 years or in any budget. So I don't know if in that portion of the others and more, the museum and the senior center are considered in these expenses.
And is your question around operating costs or around capital improvements to both? Okay. So for the capital improvements, we do have some set aside for the museum for 2025, as well as for the senior center, the CDBG funds you had mentioned, and then out projected in 2027, some more dollars, not within this budget, but part of the capital budget looks out 6 years. And so planning to allocate some more in the future for some of the other capital costs around the museum. And so there's definitely that. For the operating costs, the Parks and Recreation hasn't used their full budget every year. And so MJ's really wanting to look at what their budget is and see how this year ends up to be able to shift some dollars around within their budget. Because they had 5 different divisions, it was viewed as 5 different units, and instead of a whole department where they could kind of ebb and flow some of their dollars. And so there's definitely opportunity to be able to shift dollars around within the Parks and Recreation budget, but the increase in their budget right now is not for specific anything going for a museum or increase in anything for the senior center for operating costs other than any cost of living increases for wages.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. I have a few questions. Thank you, Carrie, for your presentation. And I might have missed it through the presentation, but in this year's budget, as we're looking at it, of the biennium budget that we would potentially vote to pass, for the home repair fund, is there an increase in that? Because I don't recall hearing about it. And
Housing repair program.
yeah, the housing repair program, and also from the prior budget, 2 years ago, we were also getting into the home ownership discussion, right? We didn't vote so much on that, but we had that line item of home repair, housing repair. So is there an increase in it in the next 2 years?
I don't believe there's an increase to that line item for housing repair, but I would have to get back to you on that.
I think as I talk to community members through this budgeting process, it's important, particularly for our seniors and those from communities of color, in terms of the home repair, housing repair, and the value that's out of that. Of course, I know there's always outreach issue, but that's something that I'd like to see. I have the next question, which I truly believe in equitable pay for all. But when you mentioned last time in terms of the chief and deputy chief's pay being significantly low, and you did send us the information. So I have two questions regarding to that. One is it standard in our city to have, because my understanding is as administrators, there's the pay salary schedule that we have. Is it something in particular in terms of the police department that we're doing this as a council ask through the project for the biennium budget? Or is it just that it's different? They're not necessarily administrator, like how, with all the other administrators, it's the same, or like we see that in the adjustment schedule. I just want to understand the institutional knowledge, or what was the policy surrounding that?
I think that in other cities, the police chief is paid differently from the administrators. We're unique that all of our administrators are paid the same. If you look at some other cities, there is a tiering of different positions in general. When comparing our police chief and our deputy chief pay to our surrounding cities, they were quite a bit lower. And we wanted to make sure that we continued to have an accurate pay for that position. And so a study was done to increase that based on the market.
Another question to follow up is, then when you mentioned significantly low, and the data that you provided, I see the minimum and the maximum. And I know 39K is not a lot, and I can still see there's a gap. And so for the salary you're proposing, is that for just the 2 years? Is it an annual? I think there was a 4% increase. How can you kind of help me understand what it means in terms of the next few years after that as well?
So what we're proposing is to increase the deputy chief and police chief up to a higher grade. So that higher grade would be equitable with some of the other neighboring cities in the comparisons that I sent you. Right now, they were below, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think 9% and 7%. And so increasing them to be comparable, and then they'll continue to increase based on cost of living adjustments as we move forward. But just for the next 2 years, that's where they'll be set on the salary grade, and then increase as we increase non-representatives. Periodically, we really do need to look at positions and how we're comparing to different cities and within the market. And we have not done a salary study with non-represented positions in a really long time. It's creating a compression problem. And so when we have police contracts that are increasing at a higher rate than what our non-represented salaries are, which deputy chief and chiefs are, it can creates this compression problem where commanders or police officers are pushing up against a position of a deputy chief, and it might not make as much sense for someone to want to even promote to a deputy chief if they're just looking at dollars. I know that there's more to that when you look at a position to promote to, but we want to make sure that we're giving the best opportunity to have the best person in those positions.
Any other questions from council? Proceed.
I think just to piggyback on that, just to ask, what is the, and it's again, just for institutional knowledge, why is it that we set all the administrators the same salary?
I can't answer that. That's been that way since I started and back in 2010. I'm not sure why.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I have got a committee report here, which says the committee of whole concurs with the mayor's recommendations to include for council consideration on November 4th council meeting agenda, the budget legislation that was included within the meeting materials for the October 28, 2024 committee of the whole meeting, with the following changes if applicable. Any issues with this report? All right. Signed it. Thank you so much, Carrie.
So since we didn't have any changes I heard, we wouldn't have with the following changes if applicable.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Meeting's adjourned.